Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Capital Edge Tip Line. I'm Chad Braley, the CEO of Capital Edge. This week, we're going to talk about some of the supply chain priorities for contractors in 2026. Kind of alluded to this a little bit with other tip lines, but felt it might be good to just kind of focus on this for a specific one. We're really going to talk about kind of six priorities, at least six priorities as kind of we see them, right? And how the NDAA for 2026 really shifts Department of War's commerciality posture and a lot of the emerging industrial base pressures within the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base. And one of the things that we're consistently seeing, right, and hearing, and it's interesting because when we talk about commercial sourcing, right, the revolutionary FAR overhaul, right, really repositions this as the preferred baseline for DoD procurement, right? I could get on my soapbox for a long time and say FAR Part 12 has always been there. It's always directed us to buy commercial as much as we possibly can, but we need to say it again, and we need to highlight it, and we need to put other guidance out there, right, for the community to actually adopt it. And from a government perspective, right, we need to change the way that we're thinking. One of those is, when we've talked about it in a previous tip line, the non-traditional defense contractor, right, which says, I don't now under DFAR says I don't even need a commerciality determination for that because it's a non-traditional defense contractor. So by definition, whatever they produce or sell should be commercial, right? So the burden really shifts from proving commerciality, or should shift, to demonstrating fair and reasonable pricing, right, through whether it be past commercial invoices or capability-based pricing. Now, what's interesting is as we continue to hear this, and I continue to talk about it, and then I also continue to talk and work with clients who aren't necessarily seeing this shift. So I'm excited for this for a lot of the contracting community. However, I'm not really seeing the implementation of it yet. I think the government is still struggling with, I still want your cost, I still want your cost and pricing data, right? I still want to know what it costs. The other interesting thing, right, DoD's been prohibited from adding extra clauses to commercial product and service acquisitions, right? And it's just supposed to be the bare minimum for commercial. So for a lot of organizations, I think, kind of looking at that, right, because that's going to play into CPSR compliance. Am I pushing things down that are unnecessary from a commercial standpoint? Because now, I've got guidance saying I'm prohibited from doing that. So the subcontract with the kitchen sink terms and conditions still included needs to go away, right? There's some public database coming, not yet, for 2027 to force transparency around Buy America, Trade Agreements Act, Berry compliance. And so that's going to be interesting. But, I think expanding the commercial supplier network, right, really pushing for commercial item determinations, really utilizing the non-traditional defense contractor for existing contractors today that would meet that definition, right, and the primes being willing to accept that and understand how to contract in that environment is going to be absolutely critical. Obviously, we still have to be able to support and strengthen price reasonableness documentation around that, and also to see how that kind of flows down, right, the supply chain. That's and speaking of the flow down, right, we've got capacity planning, right, for the defense industrial base. There's concerns right there about capacity, right, aging equipment, workforce shortages. I've had a number of discussions with clients who are seeing production ramp up, and they're having a hard time finding people that they can hire that are qualified to do the work. But the Department of War is certainly evaluating some long-term ordering strategies. One of those is, that I've seen is the munitions acquisition framework, which has obviously been press released a few times by different organizations to do more long-term ordering. They're talking about 7-year contracts, right? In providing more visibility into minimum buy requirements and projected capacity, so that the DIB can actually do capacity planning, which is really now a risk management requirement, not just a business preference, right? And it also plays into, right, how you're doing that is going to play into compliance. If you think about purchasing, if you think about estimating, if you think about MMAS, is providing more predictable demand to the supply chain if you really want people to invest in improving infrastructure, expanding capacity, right, and hiring people. So this is going to be, you know, a big deal, and it's really going to change. I've had a lot of discussions already with clients around changing. You know, how are we going to execute this if we're getting, you know, at least this initial guidance that orders are going to double, they're going to triple, they're going to quadruple. Do I even have enough, you know, space in my, you know, facility to be able to do this? Do I need to get new space, and things of that nature? So it does look like, you know, at least at the Department of War level, that they're willing to give more visibility and insight into that so that companies can, in fact, plan. Um, Quickly, we'll touch on tariffs, duty recovery, refund processing. I've spoken on tariffs in previous tip line, I believe, last fall. But obviously, that's been a little bit of a moving target. I know there's a lot of people in line, if you will, for refund processing, that which is a compliance, you know, expectation, not necessarily just some optimal or optional, excuse me, financial optimization, and then making sure that, you know, that tariff treatment, right, aligns with COO certifications and, um, you know, Buy America, Trade Agreements Act determinations, and really creating kind of a documented workflow there within your organizations to be able to track that. Aluminum and copper, right, from a specialty metal standpoint, has been something that's been talked about. It's been an issue, you know, in terms of expanding the operational importance, right? There's supply shortages, there's geopolitical constraints. We have a lot of different things going on in the world than when I talked to you in the last tip line. But really, from a contractor perspective, I think it's, you know, strengthening specialty metal sourcing controls now, especially for aluminum, copper, but really for everything, by validating certifications, right? Mapping lower tier suppliers. Where's my source? Where's it coming from? And expecting more DCMA and Department of War spot checks on that front. On the Buy American Act and the Trade Agreements Act side, right, we're seeing, I think enforcement is certainly going to tighten even more as we prepare for this 2027 public compliance database, right? We need to make sure, if I'm a prime, that, you know, all tiers of my subcontractors, I've got accuracy there, especially for things like electronics, for fasteners, and other metal components. Domestic content thresholds are going to continue to rise, so the documentation and tracking of that is very key to the overall supply chain compliance, because we certainly don't want to be in that database as somebody that's not able to comply or hasn't been complying. But it's definitely more of should be more focus, if you will, from a compliance regime, right? Monitoring the COO changes, updating flow downs, preparing for public disclosure, right, of that compliance status. And then certainly last but not least, it's been talked about for years, it's still being talked about, right? CMMC and cyber requirements, right? That is a supply chain qualification requirement, right? We've got CMMC level 1, right, handling FCI level 2 with CUI and CDI, right? We have DFARS, right, obviously requires the 72-hour incident reporting and the NIST 800-171 compliance. But, you know, the risk, and everybody, you know, the major primes and even the second tiers, right? Everybody's been working on this, right? The biggest challenge now is kind of getting in line to get, you know, maybe get your audit from your C3 PAO, because they're pretty booked up and pretty busy. But, you know, as it goes further down the supply chain, right, there's a lot of companies down there, I think, that are still struggling with that. So it's front and center, right? It has to be addressed. It needs to be addressed. Obviously, if you need some CMMC support, you know, happy to you know, talk to you about that and see how Capital Edge can help. But making sure from a contractor perspective, right, that we're integrating CMMC compliance, CMC readiness within the supply chain into that supplier selection, the onboarding, right, and the annual reviews. So a lot of things happening in supply chain. We think this is going to continue to be an area of significant oversight. It'll be interesting to see how some of this also maybe spills into changes from a contractor purchasing system review. But as soon as we hear something on that, we'll let you know. Thank you for joining us this week. Again, if you have any questions, if you have any feedback, if there's other topics you'd like to have us talk about or have me talk about or address, I'd be happy to do that. Appreciate, you know, everybody that's been following, and hope it's been helpful. And until next time, take care.